Excuse me for a second here. I had my eyes closed so long. It's taken a while to get this one back in where I can see through that blur that is in there. So just to stimulate your minds a little bit, well, to wake you up, I'm going to ask you a question. And I want you to come up with a number in your mind. Don't say it out loud. Just think about a number connected to the answer to this. What is the average size of an American family today? That is the number of members of one household. So what do you think? What is the average size of an American family? Got it? Yeah. Dawn's up here yawning. Got a number in your mind? According to statistics from last year, 2022, the average American family has 2.5 people in it. Now, I feel a little sorry for that half person that is there. There might be some counseling sessions coming up for that half person, but and I'm praying that you're not that half person where you're there, but just kind of there or whatever. But just to put this into perspective, according to the U.S. Census Bureau in 1850, here's another number for you to come up. What do you think the average size of a family was then? In 1850. Got a number? 9. Any of you get it right? Almost. I read a story about a pastor that was visiting with one of the families in his congregation that had a large family. And when he went to their home visiting them, he asked the oldest son that how many children are in your family? And the boy said there was 9 children in the family. And the pastor just commented, wow, so many children, it must cost a lot. And the boy just immediately said, oh no, we don't buy them, we just raise them. Now we're living in 2023, pretty close to 2022. And we all know that our families being small, it's still a struggle at times. Financially, getting along, just sometimes it's a struggle. Sometimes it's a handful, family issues. A woman posted a sarcastic post on Twitter, her Twitter page, and this is what it said. The great thing about having 4 kids is having 4 people to watch me bring in the groceries all by myself. Well, our Bible passage today, we're going to be looking at a family. So, what do you think the average size, and this isn't an average, this is going to be an exact number, but what do you think back in the Bible days the average size of a family would be? Kind of think about that. We're going to be going all the way back to 2015 BC, before Christ. We're going to be looking at the blended family of Jacob and his 2 wives, Rachel and Leah, and then also Rachel and Leah's handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah. And altogether, they had 12 sons and 1 daughter. Now, you guys, how would you like to be the one that's trying to date that 1 daughter? anyways, we could go back to our story and we could say, well, 12 sons and 1 daughter, and they didn't buy a single one. They just raised them. But the problem was that they were raising them, but they weren't raising them to really get along. I mean, can you imagine being a part of that family and there's 4 mamas? Can you see the strife that would be taking place in that family? And that's what we're going to be kind of looking at today. Jacob made it clear that he had a favorite son, and that was Joseph. And you remember what he did. He made him a coat of many colors, this special robe. And the result of that is that Joseph's brothers, they burned with envy. What is envy? You could put jealousy in there. You could put resentment, bitterness, spite. You maybe have even heard that envy is one of what they call the 7 deadly sins. And it's not too hard using our imagination to imagine that. We see it in the world today. A whole lot of the problems that we have stem from envy. That's why God tells us not to covet. But we also have already seen it in history up to this point. I mean, we've seen Cain and that envied Abel. And what was the end result of that? It was murder. Last week we talked about Jacob and Esau, with Jacob wrestling with an angel of God. What was that all about? Well, Jacob envied Esau. And what was the result? It was a family that was torn apart, was torn in two. And in our story today, Rachel, she envied Leah, and Leah envied Rachel. What was the end result? Bilhah and Zilpah, their handmaids, are forced to bear children for Jacob. And now, Joseph, a somewhat innocent teenager, if a teenager can be innocent, a somewhat innocent teenager, he becomes the target of his brother's envy. Let's go to the text. We're going to be looking at Genesis 37 this morning. And we're going to skip around just a little bit with it, but we're going to start off with verses 3 and 4. Now, Israel, and remember from last week, Jacob has this wrestling match with God's angel and grabs onto him and says, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And God changes Jacob's name, which means supplanter, to Israel, which means God prevails. So this is Jacob / Israel now. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And remember that it's Rachel, his favorite, the one he worked to get and then got tricked into Leah. That's that age, the son that they had together. That's his favorite son now. And he made him an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word in him. You see that envy? That is right there. And you'll remember the story here. We're not going to read it from the scripture, but Joseph's brothers are out watching the sheep herd, and Jacob, Israel, sends Joseph off to see how they are doing and so forth. So we're going to pick this up in verse 18 now. But they, that's the brothers, saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Envy. Here comes that dreamer. They said, remember that Joseph, and that's why I say innocent, somewhat innocent Joseph. Remember, he had the dreams of the sheaves of wheat, and all the others, their sheaves bowed down to him, and he had the dream of the sun and the moon and 11 stars that bowed down to him. So he has a role in this too. He's not so innocent. But here, verse 19, here comes that dreamer. They said to each other, come on, let us kill him and throw him into this cistern and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Verse 21, when Reuben, one of the brothers, heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him in the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take them back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe that he was wearing, and they took him and threw him in this cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat that meal, just picture that. They have just thrown their younger brother in the cistern, been talked out of killing him, and now they sit down to have a meal. That's what envy can do to us. As they sat down to eat the meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take him down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him. After all, he is our brother. He's our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Now Joseph, he was just going along through life. And all of a sudden everything is gone for him. His future was so bright. His life seemed to be set up for a total success. But then just suddenly, in one day, in one moment of time, it was all torn away from him. And maybe that's where we should be asking ourselves this question. What if I was in Joseph's shoes? When everything that matters to you has been torn away, who are you? Who are you? When all that is left in the moment right in front of you is this aching heart, is this loneliness, maybe is in this confusing, what just happened? How do you typically respond? Do you withdraw? Maybe explode? Or do you trust God? Not just because that's the right answer, but I mean, actually trust in God and live out life with that trust, in that trust. In just a few hours in Joseph's day, everything that mattered to him, everything that defined his life, was ripped away from him. His home, family, gone. He went from being the favored son to an exiled slave. Just that quick. Think about it. When we face a loss of this magnitude, what's it feel like? Doesn't it feel like you've been sucker punched, that your identity all of a sudden has just had the wind knocked out of it? The loss of a loved one causes us to question what we will do without them in our lives. The loss of a job makes us question our capability of being able to support ourselves or support our family. What are we going to do? When our pain causes us to turn away from God, we also lose the ultimate foundation of our identity, our purpose, and our security. So then, how do we get that back when we've had everything torn away from us? How do we get that identity, purpose, and security back? There's an Olympic athlete. His name is Sermo Farah. He's a track star for the United Kingdom. He has won 4 Olympic medals in long-distance running, and he has 6 world titles. It was just a few years ago that he revealed that as a 9-year-old, he was kidnapped from his home in Somalia, and he was brought to the United Kingdom. What happened was civil war broke out there in Somalia, and especially in his hometown of Somaliland. And he was taken for his safety from there by a woman, taking him to the United Kingdom, leaving his mother behind. This woman brought him to the United Kingdom, and the first night there, had taken him to her apartment, and in front of him she took the contact for information because he had relatives in the UK that she was taking him to. She took that paper that had all that contact information on it and just ripped it up and threw it in the trash. And Sir Mo says that at that moment he knew that he was in trouble. 9 years old. The other woman made him a domestic servant. That's just kind of a sophisticated way of saying made him her slave. Forced him to do housework, to do child care in order to be fed and to have a roof over his head. When he turned 12, the woman allowed him to enroll in school. But because he hadn't been in school for a long time, many years, he was way behind his classmates. And you know how kids are. He was kind of withdrawn, and he was kind of alienated from the other students and picked on somewhat. But the teachers observed him that when he was running on the track, he seemed to be relaxed. He seemed to be able to thrive on the track. Well, eventually, Sir Mo opened up to his PE teacher and told him that he'd been kidnapped. The teacher called social services there, and they got Sir Mo removed from that place and also placed into a Somali family as a foster child there in the United Kingdom. And this is what he says about it. I still missed my real family. But from that moment, everything got better. I felt like a lot of stuff was lifted off my shoulders, and I felt like me again. Well, he continued to excel in track and began to get some publicity with his achievements. And then one day, a Somali woman that lived in London gave him a little cassette tape. And it was a tape of his mother from back in Somalia that she had recorded to him. Apparently someone that had heard his story and so forth and had made the effort to find his mother and give her an update on him, and she had recorded this cassette to be taken back to him. Well, it wasn't but a few days that he was on a plane with his son and going down to Somalia to be reunited with his mother and two brothers now that he didn't even know about. Kind of sounds like a modern day Joseph story there, doesn't it? I insert this in here just to make us think, well, that's just a Bible story from back in those days. It still happens today. And you know it. You've experienced it, maybe not to this level, but you've experienced times when everything that mattered to you seemed to be gone. What did it do to you? So, back to our question. When everything that matters to you is torn away, who are you? Who was Joseph? Who was Joseph when everything that mattered was torn away from him? He was still a child of God. This merciful God that led his family for generations. This faithful God that had made a covenant with his ancestors to make a great nation out of them. But most of all, Joseph knew that he was a child of God. And Joseph displayed that godly, wise, and trustworthy character while he was a captive in Egypt. You know all the stories. Terrible situations that he was put into. But because he knew his identity, purpose, and security was found in who he really was, a child of God, he could not be taken away. That could not be taken away from him. No matter what was going on in his life, no matter what he was going through or being put through, in everything, Joseph trusts in God, and he sought to do God's will. Eugene Peterson wrote a book, and there's a little outtake from one of his books that I ran into in a devotion that applies here. Discipleship is a decision to live by what I know about God, not by what I feel about him or myself or my neighbors. Discipleship is a decision to live by what I know about God, not what I feel about him or myself or others. Isn't that what Joseph did here? He made a decision, even in those terrible situations that he was in. Overwhelming circumstances. He made a decision to live by what he knew about God. Joseph didn't let his loss derail him and his difficult circumstances to define who he was. He knew he was a child of God. His godly integrity and wisdom, as we know, it impressed the Pharaoh, and eventually he is raised up to be governor over the land of Egypt. Why? Because he trusted God. Trusted in that he was a child of God, no matter what was going on around him. He was a child of God. Many years ago, Pastor Norman Vincent Peale, he was asked to address a student body at the Naval Air College down in Pensacola, Florida. And there was a Navy captain that had arranged to fly him back up to New York afterwards. Well, as they were heading to New York, they ran into some bad weather, and the captain could no longer navigate by his eyes, by sight. And the captain assured Dr. Peale that he didn't need to see where he was going to get them to New York, to get him there safely. He trusted his instruments on his instrument panel to keep him flying on course. In spite of the thick fog and limited visibility, the pilot made a perfect landing in New York. When Reverend Peale complimented the pilot on his skill, the man simply replied to him, the primary thing was it just took faith. It just took faith. And this is what he said. When I'm flying in an overcast, I have to have faith in the instruments. I know they work. They're consistently tested. I know that I may count upon them. I have implicit faith in them. If I don't have that faith, I might say to myself, well, maybe this instrument isn't exactly right, so I'd better do this and make some kind of a variation. That could lead to tragic consequences. But I do have implicit faith in those instruments, and that is what brought us in through this overcast to a safe landing. Joseph trusted in that he was a child of God. He knew he could count on God. What does that mean? He trusted God. He had implicit, that complete faith in God when everything around him was falling apart. And he continued living in obedience to God, even under the worst circumstances. And God led him to a position of great honor and of great power. So how Joseph responded to his losses determined his future, not just his future, but it also was the future of a nation. How we respond when everything that matters to us is torn away, that also determines not just our future, but also the future of those around us. In December of 2005, a man named Noah Galloway, a soldier, he was serving his second deployment in Iraq when his armored vehicle triggered a roadside bomb and the powerful blast flipped the vehicle over. Noah woke up in an Army hospital in Washington, D.C. There we go. He was missing most of his left arm and left leg. And understandably, Galloway struggled with his injuries. But his biggest struggle was the loss of his military career, which was his identity, was who he was. So he fell into a deep depression, which led to drinking and just an overall decline in his quality of life. But then one day, he walked out of his bedroom and saw his 3 children sitting on the couch in the living room, watching TV. And this is what he says about that moment. I realized that to my 2 boys, I was showing them what a man is. And that's what they were going to become one day. To my little girl, I'm showing her how a man's supposed to act. And that's what she'll look for one day in a man. And it terrified me. His words. He says that moment was a turning point in his life. He began eating right and working out. And he's become a powerful athlete. He competes in marathons and these things that are called ultra runs, which are just huge, tough obstacle courses. I don't know if you can tell it or not, but he's running through tires there, carrying a log on his shoulder. He even, I don't know, you might have seen it, he even made an appearance on Dancing with the Stars. He's become an influential speaker, and he's started a charitable foundation. His life serves as a powerful example of how our response to our losses can create a new future for us, can give us a new purpose, greater than we could have imagined before, a purpose that is bigger than our fears. When everything that mattered to Joseph had been torn away, he found the one thing that was bigger than his fears, and that was his faith in God. Joseph remembered that he was a child of a merciful and a faithful God. And he let that knowledge guide his perspective, his attitudes in the different circumstances he found himself in, and his actions. His faithfulness didn't just affect his future, but it also affected the future of his family and the whole nation. When everything seems to be falling apart, when our perception of life seems to be more than we can handle, remember, you are still a child of God. And nothing can take that from you, can take that from us. So make a conscious decision to trust God and live as God's witness, no matter what the situations are that you find yourself in. And the result, you will see God use your faithfulness to change not just your future, but the future of your loved ones and those that you have contact with. You will discover a new identity, a new purpose, and you will have new security. You will be reminded that you are a child of God, and no one can take that from you. You still have your name. No one can take that from you. You are God's child. Father, I thank you for, again, this reminder, because it's so easy for us to get caught up in what the world is doing to us, different circumstances that we face, that we find ourselves, different situations we find ourselves in. It's so easy to put our faith and our trust in the things of this world that we have, in our accomplishments, in what we have done, in our abilities, what we can do. And we make that our identity and make that our purpose, and we give that the security. But Father, we know that the things of this world will pass away. And they do. As each one of us has experienced here. Father, I pray that and will experience in the future. Father, I pray that when this happens to us, that, Father, we'll be reminded by your Spirit of this morning, this message, that no matter how much we feel devastated, no matter if everything that we have that matters to us is torn away, no one can take us from your hand. We are still your child. Give us your strength, Father, to trust that and then to live in that trust, just as Joseph did. And Father, let it be. Give us a new identity. Give us a new purpose. Give us new security in you at a level that we have never known before, which is so much stronger than any fears that we might have. Father, just help us to be a part of your family. Knowing that you desire that. And Father, that no one can take that from us. Help us to live that, Father. In Jesus' name, amen. Just turning your hymnals to number 79, Trusting Jesus. Please stand.